What's up, amigos? Commander Jaime here today. We're gonna do a Revonn standard deck profile today. So let's get right into it. On to the grade 3. So we are playing 7 grade 3s in this deck profile. We have 4 Revonn and 3 of the Fort Vessel Dragon. Now, there are other deck profiles that have gone to the 4 grade 3s as well. So my build's a little more focused with having a higher grade 3 count and also utilizing the grade 1 Barragios to help filter. Not only just to get the right pieces to ride and also use as a rigger potentially, but also to filter non-triggers out of the deck so your drive checks with Revonn become a little more critical. Literally, no pun intended. Revonn's first skill is that he can rest another rearguard and your opponent gets minus 5k for their Vanguard till the end of the turn, which is actually really good. So that means if they have a 13k Vanguard, they go down to an 8k. So literally even your grade 1s that don't have power-ups can actually hit them, and this actually calls for abuse with Tidal Assault or Algos, where you can kind of like poke for the first and second battle and actually get some damage in. So they have to either guard it or take a damage at that point. So it helps with that pressure. Also, to go along with this skill is the second skill when it attacks, and if you have 5 or more rested rear guards until the end of the turn, this gets 15k and a drive +1. And so that's very fantastic on top of that. And also, if you have a grade 3 in assault, you get a crit. And so that's why I meant, more crit pressure. So you go triple drive. In standard, it's actually more of a big deal. I know in premium, you could just stride and get triple drive, but this is standard. So having that extra drive check actually helps out. And like I said, this build helps with more focusing on the filtering aspect, so you can get those triggers on his drive checks as well. And so you can put it on the remaining units that stand. One of the things I noticed about this deck is that you really don't have that many rearguards standing after his attack. You may have 1 or 2 rearguards really that are still standing, and in fact one of them may be the Galeas that restands, and so I felt like the crit more helped in that case, and so utilizing this pressure on top of that just helps with that in that regard as well. And so at first, the 5 rearguard commitment seems like a lot, but there are cards to help with that filter themselves out and give you back advantage, so we'll cover those as we go along. The 3 Fort Vessel Dragon, honestly, it's a really good card because of 2 aspects. It's a rearguard that works with Revonn, so his skill is basically if you have 4 or more rested rearguards, it counts itself as well. And if your Vanguard is Revonn, this unit cannot be retired by your opponent's card effects and it gets plus 5k. So it can become a 17k beater by itself. If you put him in an Excel circle, he becomes 22k. So if your opponent gets a damage check trigger basically, and they become 18k, his 22k base on a second Excel circle can actually hit by himself. And at the same time, he's 17k. So if you're going against like a 12k Vanguard, that got down to 7k. So even if they got a trigger, they're 17k. And his skill alone can actually hit him on a normal circle as well. So that's kind of nice, just having that beater right there. Sometimes I've had units besides Narissa being rested by Revonn's skill. And so if I rested something behind a Fort Vessel Dragon, I don't necessarily need the boost to actually hit numbers at that point. So that helps out in that regard. And then the other skill is when he's placed on a Vanguard, you can counterblast 1 and actually get the minus 5k on your opponent's Vanguard. Again, reducing them to the 8k, 7k, 6k base, depending on what power their Vanguard is, essentially. And so you kind of get that Revonn skill almost, but in the form of a counterblast. And that's actually pretty good in that turn respect. You could still do some plays, but honestly, you'd rather ride Revonn because you want the extra drive check, the extra power, and then potentially the crit, depending on what you ride and if you soul charge a grade 3. But in this case, you don't really soul charge early on. So the important thing is that if you do ride them, you can follow up back with a Revonn. And then with the help with Barragios, if you do have them, you can filter them out by grabbing a Revonn and discarding this. So you can play around, and again, it's a 7 grade 3s. I know Cardfight King actually went down to the 4 grade 3s. You can check out his video, and you can actually see his actual deck profile, and honestly, he explains how he went from a higher grade 3 count to a 4 grade 3 count, and honestly, it's a little uncomfortable. Nobody likes to be grade stuck, in fact, in Aquaforce, and that is something that we just learned about. But anyway, so great cards overall. Honestly, you want Revonn, of course, to be in your main ride, and this is kind of like your backup, but most of the time you do end up riding Revonn, and so take advantage of Revonn for sure. On to the grade 2s. As you can see, I play a good amount of grade 2s in this lineup, and one of the important and fantastic cards of this set is actually Galeas. Galeas is phenomenal, and so he has 2 skills. One of them is Vanguard and Rearguard, so during your turn, if you have 4 or more rested Rearguards, he counts himself as well. This unit gets 5k. And so this actually, he becomes a 14k attacker on his own, essentially. And it's very critical because it helps with his second skill. And his second skill is once per turn when your grade 3 Vanguard specifically attacks. If your opponent's Vanguard is also different from its original attack, then you can Counter Blast 1 and stand this unit. So this becomes your re-standard after as Revonn declares his attack. So that way you can put triggers onto him and he can still actually apply pressure. So you get more attacks in that turn as well. And so like I said, that 5k helps because then he becomes a 14k. If you put it on an XL2 circle, he becomes 19k. And so even if they get a damage check trigger, then he can actually hit by himself. Or if you get boosted with a rear guard, that can actually hit some phenomenal numbers. So a good example would be Barragios, where Barragios can be a 13k booster. So the 13 plus the 14 makes 27k, which is beautiful numbers in a 12k normally base Vanguard, like in XL or not Force, but Protect and that kind of stuff. So definitely go to Galeas. His brother from another mother is Fuevos. And the reason I say that is because he has the exact same skill where your grade 3 Vanguard attacks. If your opponent's a different power from its original power, then you can discard a card to stand it. So he's a discard rather than the counterblast. That's the key difference. And then the first go is that when he's placed on, and if he's placed on 2 rear guards, so and if your Vanguard is Revonn, then you can Soul Blast 1, rest this unit, and look at the top card and call it to rear guard circle. So that skill helps with generating a feel, making it easier to do Revonn skills. Any other like requirements of units too that see 4 or more rested units for example. And so he helps with that purpose. Especially he shines more with like the Murakami matchup, for example, where they start diminishing your regards and all that kind of stuff. So sometimes having this guy become like a 2-card play essentially by himself actually helps in that regard as well. And so as you can see, I'm playing the 2/2. And if it's like a Murakami heavy metagame for you, I would definitely recommend and bump it up to 3 or 4 cards. Just really depends on your metagame and your call. He's still a good card. It's just that Galea shines more often than Fuevos, but Fuevos is still key in that respect. And so that discard to restand can be vital, especially when your opponent's at 5 damage, then they have to guard everything essentially. And so if your opponent's at 8k, then you have the 9k to still hit. And that could be the difference between winning and losing, for example. So he's still worth, and I see value in this deck. And to kind of go with the other card is the Thanasis. Now, Thanasis is a different card. I'll put it that way. And so normally his skill in a vacuum wouldn't be as great. And it's Vanguard, Rearguard. Once per turn, you can rest one of your other Rearguards, and this card gets 5k. Now, why would this card be even useful or utilized in this deck is that you have Narissa, a grade 1, which can actually stand itself when it's rested by an effect. So when Revonn or Thanasis rests it, that restands and it gets powered up. So you're beefing up the Narissa, and also this becomes a 14k attacker at that point. So he becomes a little beater by himself. Again, if you put up some boosters behind him, you can make some really good column numbers as well. And then there's some play you can do in the early game too, where if you ride Algos, essentially, you can restand the Narissa to make a 4-attack turn and make it abusing the Narissa power up in that sense as well. And so I'm playing the 2-2 ratio just to see, like, by the, what would I call it, the mid to late game, see at least one of them. And that's where I would value them. And then depending on my setup, I would rather use the Thanasis or I'd rather use the Fuevos. Fuevos is there for the consistency of restanding and also building a field, where Thanasis is kind of like a win more card. So if you make beefier columns, you can potentially win harder that turn, and helping you guarantee that win, essentially. And so they have both their uses and their moments. Honestly, if I were to replace this card, I would bump up the Fuevos instead. And then I would also probably add another card to the grade 1 lineup, for example. So, and honestly, I believe it was Wave Nation. Yeah, Wave Nation. He did a phenomenal deck profile with Revonn, with Thanasis being focused as well. And he explained the double Narissa restand combo and all that stuff, that you make giant numbers, essentially. And that's why I say it's like a more of a win more card, basically. So, going into the Coral Assault and Algos, these are older cards from the previous set. Coral Assault is that basically if you had 4 attacks or more this turn, if this is rested, or if you have 4 battles or more, you can put it into Soul, draw a card at the end of the turn. So that's one of the cards that help you actually keep maintaining advantage, because you have to commit a board to make Revonn effective, essentially. And this is one of the few cards that actually help generate back your advantage back to your hand. So that way you basically don't commit your whole hand to the field and you got nothing in your hand. It feels bad, right? And then his other skill is that he gets 15k if he sees 4 other units that are rested. So he can count the Vanguard, but he does not count himself. So that's a key difference. So just be mindful of that. I like to put him by himself, whether it be in another Excel circle or by himself, where he can just attack and get the power up. Because if your opponent is already minused, he can hit the Vanguard no problem with himself. Becoming a 24k or a 29k beater by himself is really valuable in this deck and just synergetically works with this deck basically. And then the Algos is another restandard. There's Tidal Assault, but I decided to go to the Algos because I am playing the Nicholas engine. So there's more filtering in that respect, and so Algos is preferred. So he's the one, if it's the first battle, you can Counter Blast stand it. So it gives you that extra attack, and you can take advantage of that second battle where you're 9-9 and your opponent's 8k or lower. So that helps a lot too. And then the other skill when he's on Vanguard is when he attacks in his second wave or more, you can Counter Blast, Soul Blast, restand one of your units. So what I mean by that is that basically if you do a combo, which I'll explain later. How about that? So I can show off the cards. And essentially, you can restand any unit. You can stand with a Coral Assault. Basically, you can pop down 2 Coral Assaults in the rear guard, poke, 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 and then restand one of them, and then poke, and then you filter them into the soul and draw 2 cards. If you want to dig deeper, maybe you're missing a Revonn, maybe you're missing some follow-up pieces, maybe you're in Narissa, so that could be a play. And also, you're applying some pressure that potentially your opponent, if they don't get any triggers in the damage check, they're going to have to guard everything or take everything. So it's very powerful to help with that early game too. But ideally, you want to save for your Counter Blast for Galeos, because honestly, these are the only cards that Counter Blast in the deck. And so you want to make sure your Revonn turn is actually very effective. So just keep in mind that with Counter Blast management, and you'll be fine. All right? On to the grade 1. So I'm playing 4 Baragios, 4 Narissa, and the 2 Nicholas. I wanted to make room in the grade 2s and the grade 3s, so the grade 1 count is a little lower than usual. Let's start with Baragios. I already mentioned Baragios a little bit. So Vanguard, Rearguard. If you have 4 more rested Rearguards, he gets a 5k. So he has a similar skill as Galeas. So he's very key because he becomes a 13k attacker or a booster depending on your situation. And what I like about him is that his 13k can actually boost Revonn, because Revonn will get the 15k on top of his own skill. So he'll be 27k. Plus a 13k booster makes a 40k Vanguard line with triple drive. So it makes that Vanguard attack very threatening and forcing a PG or committing to hand to guard for that attack, because if you're triple drive and you're filtering, you're going to hit a crit more than likely, essentially. The second skill, like I said, he's still basically on place. Check the top 5 for a grade 3. If you find one, you can add it, and if you do, discard one. This helps grab your Revons, your Fort Vessels, filtering just because you want to. Sometimes it can make a turn. Maybe you need another rearguard, and if you call this and you get a Fort Vessel, you can then call it and actually kind of work with that. It's happened to me a couple times. I know in Premium, he's helped a ton where he searches a Riptide, but in Standard, that's basically what you can utilize him. So he's still valuable, and it's awesome. Definitely a 4 of. And so Narissa is a phenomenal unit for Revonn. And so I know I was talking about Narissa. What does she do, right? And so when she's rested by another card's ability, you can Soul Blast one, stand this unit, and it gets 10k till the end of the turn. That is not once per turn. So you can abuse it with Thanasis and Revonn on the same turn. So you can do it. For me, in this case, I have 2 Thanasis and 1 Revonn as Vanguard. I can do it 3 times and Soul Blast 3, get 30k to the Narissa. Or you do 2 separate Narissas, and then each of them restand them by +10 and all that kind of stuff. So you can distribute the power and make powerful columns and all that kind of thing. And she's 8k, so she's going to hit Vanguards no matter what. And then the extra 10k just forces them to drop another 10k level of guard, essentially. So it's a phenomenal card. And on top of that, her other skill is at the end of the turn, if you have 4 or more rested rear guards, then you can put it into Assault and draw a card. She does count herself, so make sure you resolve her first before you do the resolution of Coral Assault, because Coral Assault will remove himself, and then during resolution, she checks for the number of rear guards. So make sure you do her first, because she cares about the number of rear guards on the field when she's resolving that turn. Or that skill, I should say. And so just keep in mind that. And so there's a play where, essentially, like I said, if you have the Algos, and if you have a Thanasis, let me grab it over here. Yeah, there you go. So if you have a board like this, let me see. Yeah, there we go. If you have a board like this on turn 2 and your opponent's at grade 1, if you do have the Counter Blast, essentially, then what you can do is Thanasis, Soul Blast, restand this. You still have 1 card left in the Soul because you went from 0 to 1. And then she's 18k. And so if you want, you could do the 14k, 18k, and then skill, restand this. Any triggers apply to her. Attack for 4 attacks. And you could apply early game pressure that way. And so that is a play. Not saying it's the go-to play, but it is a play for the early game. One of the things that I notice about this deck is that it doesn't have a phenomenal early game. And there's no presence of Tidal Assault, for example. Wheel Assault is not in the deck in this build particular, so it doesn't help with, you know, riding onto Wheel Assault, getting a draw and all that kind of stuff. So that could be one of the small ways to help you with the early game. And so the next card that we have is Nicholas. He's the one that basically on plays, check the top 7 cards for an Algos, add it to your hand, and then he also just gets plus 3k. So he becomes an 11k attacker. You can make better number of columns with that too. And sometimes when you have like a regular 9k, grade 2 boosted by 8k, that makes 17, which is fine against Protect and Excel clans. But when you're going against a Force clan, that extra 3k then pushes the threshold to basically them having to drop more guard in that respect. So, or if they get a trigger in the damage check, then you can hit, basically. And so that 3k actually matters, that 5k actually matters, that 10k matters. So all this actually matters. And so let's just finish up with the grade zeros. Onto the grade zeros, we are playing the 8 crits with 4 draw and the 4 heal, and our starter is the on right draw 1. You can use anyone. I just picked this art for this deck. Honestly, I've seen other deck builds play like 6 crit, 6 draw. I've seen people play front triggers instead of the crits. For me, I felt like Revonn, again, that triple drive, especially with a massive power up, you become more threatening if you do have the crits, essentially. And so that way your opponent doesn't shrug it off and just worry about your rear guards. But now your Vanguard and your rear guards are a threat. And if they guard the Vanguard, then you could just put the triggers on the remaining rear guards that can still attack and actually make that pressure happen. So the 8 crit is very valuable. On top of that, because you don't have a phenomenal early game, because you can't really multi-attack consistently throughout your games, that critical, if you rip it during the early game, can actually help you push along. So your Vanguard grade 3 turns are very effective, essentially, because you hit a crit trigger in the early game. It can mean the difference, to be honest. And then, of course, PGs for the drop PGs, so that way you can make room for the grade 1s. And that's really it for the triggers and all that. And that's pretty much the standard deck profile. Honestly, man, this one went really quick compared to premium deck profiles. But anyway, like I said, the grade 3 count, you can check out Cardfight's King video on that. It's a very good video. I definitely recommend watching that. With the Thanasis, you can check out Wave Nation's channel about the Thanasis, his combo plays with Narissa. Check that out too. Stand Up the Soryu did a different Revonn type of build where he played Blue Wings. So he used that engine per se to go along with the Revonn skill and everything. And honestly, Revonn synergizes well with the Blue Wings. So that was phenomenal. And I actually learned a lot more about Blue Wings because I honestly haven't touched Blue Wings at all. So definitely check out Stand Up the Soryu's video as well. And again, if you like the video, give it a like, comment down below, share with a friend, and subscribe. See you, amigos. Bye.